Hello, everyone. This is Damien, your host of Love, Loss, and Transformation podcast and the builders of the Light Web. This is going to be a reading I'm going to do of one of my articles I recently published on Medium. It's going to be a series of articles called Through a Scanner Gnostically. That's the title of the series, and this first article is called Through a Scanner Gnostically Part 1, That Time I Met a Gnostic. The first in a series of articles where I examine the spiritual war, Ascension, Metaphysics, and the simulation through my own personal Gnostic lens. Alrighty, dighty, I'll get to it. Note on the title, Through a Scanner Gnostically represents, in part, an homage to one of my favorite sci-fi authors, Philip K. Dick, who wrote the 1977 novel titled A Scanner Darkly, and which was adopted in 2006 for the screen by Richard Linklater and starring Keanu Reeves. A real-life Gnostic. I first heard the term Gnostic and Gnosticism back in 1999 when I was a 28-year-old wannabe Buddhist lightworker living in Missoula, Montana. As part of my lightworker mission, my wife at the time, Heidi, and I teamed up to produce a public access TV show where Heidi would sit down and interview thought leaders in the New Age community. I stayed behind the camera in the recording booth, and I edited the shows for broadcasting on Missoula's popular MCAT channel. One of her guests, whose name I don't remember, was talking to me off camera about the comparisons between Tibetan Buddhism and an off-brand and controversial version of Christianity called Gnosticism. He had always loved Jesus, he explained, but was turned off by the dualistic teachings of most organized Christian denominations. God isn't a separate being from us, he argued, and heaven isn't a place out there that we go to once we die, if and only if we fulfill a multitude of prescribed conditions during our life on earth. He said that God is in everything and in everyone, and heaven is a frequency, not a place, that's accessible right here and right now to everyone. The trick is to learn how to tap into your God self and tune into the frequency of the Pleroma. The Pleroma, he said, is the word Gnostics use for heaven, and is more akin to the Buddhist concept of nirvana, a dimension of consciousness empty of all distinction, a state of pure being whose essence is love. While the musical guest, a young bluegrass or cowpunk band named 9 Pound Hammer, performed for a live television audience, the man continued his speech to me as I sat at the soundboard, grateful that the band had 2 more songs to play before I'd be needed. Take Jesus. His real name is Yeshua, and the name Christ isn't a name, it's a title. It means anointed one. Yeshua was anointed by the real God of creation to be the seed of gnosis for humankind, that we would eventually, over our difficult growth as a suffering species, become the fruit of that seed. He proclaimed that we would do as he had done, to see the truth, to free ourselves from ignorance and the false God who has imprisoned us in this domain of war, sickness, old age, and death. The time is at hand, many Gnostics believe, for that flowering to take place, my friend. Our goal isn't to go to heaven or the Pleroma. Our goal is to bring the Pleroma to earth. That last bit sounded to me very much like what a lot of New Age people were saying at the time. It's easy to forget for those of us who were young adults during the turn of the millennia, and for those who hadn't even been born yet, but the year 2000 was a big deal. Y2K was threatening the dawn of a new dark age should the worst-case scenario play itself out. Astrologers were making bold predictions about pole shifts and increased solar activity. It was the first time I had heard the term Ascension, and back then I found it eerily reminiscent of what evangelical Christians called the rapture. Admittedly, I didn't find any of the apocalyptic heralding of much interest. End-of-the-world talk was pointless in my estimation. I was a father with a 1-year-old daughter. I was looking forward to being there through all of her trials, tribulations, and triumphs. The end of the world, to me, was just a song by a band I used to listen to a lot in the 80s. What I found captivating about the man's description, however, was how he made Christianity sound exciting. I marveled at the thematic similarities to many of the Eastern philosophies I had been studying for the past 5 years. Could there be a branch of Christianity as sophisticated and intriguing to me as Buddhism and Hinduism? I asked him what he meant about the false god and was blown away by his response. The God of the Old Testament, that is the false god. He paused, seemingly expecting me to need a moment to process his words. He was right. Wait, I said, needing clarification. You mean the God Jehovah of the Bible is evil? Is it really that hard to believe? He asked. Well, what all-loving God would create a world in which every living being's survival depends on the death of another living being against that being's will? Think about it. We take it for granted that we have to kill to survive. But why is it like that here? Why can't we survive from the energy provided by the sun? What all-loving God declares himself jealous, wrathful, and vengeful? What all-loving God demands sacrifice? What all-loving God would create a domain to torture in hellfire for all eternity all those who don't obey his contradictory laws? His questions hung in the air for a moment before he added, Have you not asked yourself these questions? Actually, I said, I did. That's one of the many reasons why I'm not a Christian. I much prefer Buddhism for its practical ability to calm my monkey mind, you know? The first of the 4 noble truths, the man said with a nod, is the truth that all living beings suffer. Yes, I agreed. It's kind of what turns a lot of people off to Buddhism, unfortunately. They forget to look at the other 3 noble truths. But it's true. This is a universe of suffering. And why do we suffer? Because we identify ourselves with our minds, which is what the all-loving God of the Bible created us to do. He and his army of archons created our minds. They created our emotions to be like theirs, and they programmed them into our energy centers. In the first energy center, the root chakra, he programmed alienation from source, which is the mother of all negative emotions. In the second, he programmed anger. In the third, he programmed fear. In the fourth, ignorance. In the fifth, envy. In the sixth, pride. In the seventh, he programmed distractive pleasures. You see, the demiurge, the false god, created this material universe based on a copy of the Pleroma, a very bad copy. The Pleroma is the actual universe of the one true God who has no name or personality. The one true God, the Gnostics call the One, or Source. Within the One, there exists countless emanations of divine light called aeons, which are more commonly called angels. The first beings created in the Pleroma were the Divine Mother and the Christ, and there was a being called Sophia. Sophia gave birth to a being on her own without the light of the Pleroma, which is very confusing to understand, but that's how the story goes. Basically, she created a being without the divine spark, and that being was very different from all the other beings of light. This being was ignorant and malevolent, had the body of a serpent and the head and face of a lion. Because he was so disfigured and cruel, Sophia cast him out of the Pleroma and into shadow, where he designed the material world, this world. His name is Yaldabaoth, the God of the Old Testament, who lied when he said he was the only God with no other gods before him. He made dark angels, replicas of the aeons from the Pleroma, and these are called archons, and with the archons, Yaldabaoth created humans, using the God spark to animate them into the material world. The Christ, who was created by the One along with the Divine Mother, was later sent down to the material world to awaken humans to their true natures and to free them from the bondage of the archons. So, In the dimension of the Pleroma, there is no death. All is eternal. And like I said before, it's accessible here and now if we can tune into that frequency. Buddhism has a definite path to do that. It's just that it takes a long time. To tune into the Pleroma, you have to purify your physical and subtle bodies via your energy centers, and throughout that purification, you must accept and flow with the Christ love in your heart. Wait, you mean you have to accept Jesus Christ as your own personal savior? I asked skeptically. The man laughed. No, the Christians got that mostly wrong too. Jesus isn't a personality. He is the pure emanation of source consciousness, which is only accessible through the heart, because it's the heart that is the gateway to compassion, love, and acceptance. The Pleroma is love. So by the law of resonance, if you vibrate with pure love, you can access the Pleroma through your own conscious awareness. That's what all the ascended masters have done, including the man named Yeshua who became Christ. When Yeshua said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't talking about the God of the Old Testament. He was talking about Source, the One, the Pleroma, where all existence arises and where all existence dissolves into. I couldn't keep up with everything this self-proclaimed Gnostic was saying. There were too many words and concepts that I was hearing for the first time. Pleroma, Demiurge, and what about the army of archons he conveniently slipped in the conversation like it was no big thing? I can't remember everything the man said, and he revealed much more about Gnosticism during the actual interview with Heidi, but I have zero recollection of that episode. MCAT as a station was in the beginning stages of going digital, but up to that point we were recording our episodes on VHS tapes. The show, lazily titled The Heidi Show, was short-lived, lasting only one season with approximately 25 shows aired. 5 years later, Heidi and I were divorced, and she took all the show's copies. She may even have destroyed them all for all I know, a distinct possibility, especially since she left behind all her New Age ways and became an evangelical, born-again Christian. There was one more thing that the man said to me before he left the recording studio that turned out to be quite prescient. If you really want to get a flavor of what Gnosticism is all about as concerns the current times, go and watch the movie The Matrix. I was confused. You mean that hacker sci-fi movie with Keanu Reeves is about Gnosticism? The previews don't do the movie justice at all. It will blow your mind because it's the most accurate movie I've ever seen at describing the plight of humanity as it relates to the actual rulers of this dimension of reality. Just go see it. The next evening, as I was walking home from work, I decided to take in a viewing of the 9 o'clock show. The man was right. The Matrix movie absolutely blew the lid off of my crown chakra. A very brief summary of my view as it stands now. 25 years later, and more people are realizing the deeper esoteric truths of the Matrix. That we are trapped in a simulation, distracted by the matrix of the physical world as our light is dimmed and our energy parasitized by a malevolent force that requires our ignorance and fear to sustain its very existence. According to the website Gnosticism Explained, Gnosticism is a type of early Christianity that taught that the material world was created by an evil being and that Christ came to earth to liberate people from this evil world through the spiritual experience called Gnosis, the root of the word Gnostic. Gnosis was salvation through mystical union with the divine, and as such was something that each individual had to experience internally for himself or herself. It couldn't be obtained through any outward social institutional means alone, believing in creeds, observing the sacraments, obeying the clergy, behaving morally, etc. End quote. For thousands of years, humanity has been food for these archontic entities that exists in and rule from the shadows. I have been aware of the Gnostic perspective for many years, but it hasn't been until very recently that I've come to accept how accurate that perspective is at describing the dynamic of microcosm and macrocosm as it relates to the ego and the higher self. As the collective, so the individual. We as a collective have largely created civilizations that amplify negative destructive traits such as greed, selfishness, competition, violence, and war, while suppressing positive sustaining traits such as generosity, compassion, cooperation, nonviolent communication, and peace. This struggle between living adversarially versus living in harmony is reflected in the individual. Because the culture doesn't model heart-centered living in our education system, the individual is tasked with figuring it out for herself. The Gnostic perspective, as I see it, believes that this dynamic is not an accident of, quote, human nature. The world as we perceive it is the world that has been, quote, pulled over our eyes to blind us from the truth, unquote. That truth? That we are each unique expressions of the One. The One is infinite awareness in awareness of itself, and the nature of that consciousness is pure, unadulterated, free-range, organic, gluten-free, grass-fed love. We forget this amazing, incredible, revolutionary truth because we are meant to forget it. Every system of our civilization is designed to keep us from realizing our divine nature, our oneness with God, and our oneness with each other. More of us than ever before have taken the red pill to wake us up. But there is another pill for us to take, the one that opens up the heart and delivers to us the greatest, most powerful weapon the universe has ever known. Not only will this weapon expose the demiurge and the archons for all to see, it will dissolve in an instant all of their power, and we will indeed bring the Pleroma down to earth where it has always belonged. That weapon: love. Up next, part 2 of Through a Scanner Gnostically, titled, The Ego is the Avatar My Higher Self Created to Adventure Through the Simulation Matrix. Thank you and have a glorious day.